Some tractors were powerful, some were innovative, but a few were dangerous enough that even standing near them changed the way people worked forever. From machines that flipped themselves without warning, to homemade loaders that rolled forward like falling towers, to engines so violent they could break a man's arm before the tractor even started. These are the 30 tractors engineers today call mechanical mistakes that should never have existed. If any of these machines surprise you, tell me which one shocked you the most. Ranked 30th, Ford 6000, the early red Tiger recall. The year was 1961 and the Ford 6000 arrived on American farms with the confidence of a new era. Beneath its long, ship-like hood and polished blue paintwork, the company promised a tractor that would redefine power. But inside the red Tiger engine, Ford's newest pride, pressure was building in ways no sales brochure dared to mention. The torque was real, impressive even, yet the hydraulic system and transmission were never truly prepared for the forces being funneled through them. Across fields in Ohio, Kansas, and Nebraska, early units began to behave like machines resisting their own design. Temperatures climbed under ordinary workloads. Vibrations escalated from a subtle tremor to a metallic protest. Some gearboxes slipped out of range, others seized entirely. And in the most troubling reports, small fires flickered beneath the operator's platform, embers of a deeper mechanical miscalculation. Dealers were overwhelmed. Farmers, once excited, now traded stories in hushed tones, frustration here, suspicion there, and finally a single shared realization. A tractor built to free labor had instead become a risk no one expected. In 1963, Ford issued a sweeping nationwide recall, one of the most dramatic and controversial in American agricultural history. From its failure, modern expectations for tractor safety were quietly rewritten, shaped by the tension the Ford 6000 left behind. Ranked 29th, John Deere 2010. Diesel, the fuel system that betrayed its own design. When John Deere unveiled the 2010 diesel in the early 1960s, it was meant to mark a transition, an ambitious step toward modular tractor architecture. The idea was elegant: powertrains built in segments, assembled with precision, and serviced with ease. Yet the very system designed to simplify the future carried within it a fault line that would soon define the machine. At the heart of the 2010 lay its unique Rusa Master-inspired fuel system, a multi-stage arrangement meant to deliver efficient atomization under heavy field load. But the tolerances were razor-thin, the channels narrow, and the materials unforgiving to contaminants common in everyday farm diesel of the era. Sediment that other engines shrugged off became a crippling hazard here. Filters clogged early, injection timing drifted, fuel pressure collapsed without warning. On thousands of acres across the Midwest, the 2010 began to falter, hesitating at the turn row, stumbling on inclines, or falling silent in the middle of cultivation. And unlike other Deere tractors, the modular design made repairs difficult. The system required near-surgical precision to restore. The result was a machine caught in a contradiction, engineered with hope for the next generation, yet undone by a vulnerability embedded from its first bolt. In the story of the 2010 diesel, danger did not come from reckless power, but from a fragile idea that could not survive the grit of real soil. Ranked 28th, Massey Ferguson 1200. The pivot frame that tilted too far. Among the steel silhouettes of 1970s agriculture, the Massey Ferguson 1200 stood apart. Taller, broader, and hinged at its waist like a creature designed for another landscape. Its pivot frame articulation promised unheard-of maneuverability. A tractor that could twist through tight headlands and follow the contour of broken ground with the fluidity of a jointed spine. But beneath this striking geometry lay an instability that engineers and farmers did not fully foresee. When the chassis split at its centerline, the tractor gained remarkable steering agility, yet surrendered a precious constant: lateral stability. Under heavy drawbar loads, the hinge could become a fulcrum rather than a joint, letting weight shift faster than an operator could react. On side slopes, The MF 1200 behaved less like a rigid-frame tractor and more like an articulated tower. Leaning into terrain with unnerving exaggeration, reports emerged from British and Canadian farms. A subtle dip in the field turning into a sharp tilt, a loaded implement pulling the rear half one way while the front half pivoted another, a slow roll becoming a sudden one. No single failure defined it. Instead, the danger lived in the design's unusual physics, a meeting point where flexibility and instability intertwined. The 1200 remains a rare sight today, remembered as both bold innovation and cautionary anomaly. A reminder that when a tractor bends in the middle, the land sometimes bends it back. Ranked 27. Lanz Bulldog Hot Bulb. When heat became the price of power. Long before diesel refinement shaped modern tractors, the Lanz Bulldog asked its operators to work with something far more primal: uncontrolled heat. Its single-cylinder hot bulb engine, simple, massive, and thunderously slow, was a marvel of early torque. But to awaken it, the machine required a ritual that bordered on hazardous devotion. The bulb had to be heated until it glowed, fuel had to enter at precisely the right moment, and the entire iron chamber had to balance on the thin edge between ignition and detonation. When that balance slipped, the price was immediate. A bulb overheated by seconds could trigger thermal runaway, a chain reaction where rising temperature fed itself. Pushing the engine past safe pressure, flames could spit from the intake. The flywheel, heavy as a millstone, kicked back with enough force to injure or throw an operator off balance. And on days when workloads extended long into dusk, the Bulldog's rising heat turned from dependable warmth into a furnace waiting for one mistake. Across German, Australian, and Argentine farms, stories accumulated: hoods scorched from flash fires, fuel igniting on outside surfaces, operators stepping back from the machine not out of respect, but out of necessity. The Bulldog delivered power, yes, but only to those willing to work beside a chamber of iron that never forgave a lapse in attention. A machine born from early industrial ambition, remembered for the sacrifices demanded by an engine that answered only to heat. Ranked 26th, same Hercules 160. The power that bent its own backbone. In the late 1970s, the same Hercules 160 appeared as a triumph of Mediterranean engineering, a four-cylinder, turbocharged brute built to climb terraces, carve through stony soil, and wrestle with workloads that humbled lesser machines. Its power-to-weight ratio was extraordinary, its torque curve aggressive, and its reputation in the hills of Italy and Spain rose quickly. But beneath that rising prestige lurked a consequence no designer fully accounted for. The frame, long and narrow to keep the tractor nimble, was never intended to carry implements that pushed the Hercules to its upper torque limits. When heavy plows or deep rippers bit into dry ground, the tractor's spine began to do something unsettling. It flexed. At first only subtly. An operator might feel a shudder through the pedals, a quiet shift beneath the seat. But under repeated stress, that flex became measurable twist, a misalignment that rippled into the driveline, the axles, and the steering geometry. On fields in southern Europe, farmers described the same sequence: a powerful pull, a harsh vibration, and then a moment where the tractor's posture changed, tilting slightly as if its skeleton had shifted against its own will. In extreme cases, the twist forced front and rear axles out of true, pulling the machine sideways on slopes where even a small deviation could become a tipping risk. Nothing catastrophic defined the Hercules 160. Instead, its danger lived in the accumulating aftermath of its labor. A tractor strong enough to break soil and strong enough in time to bend itself. Ranked 25th, Minneapolis Meline, G1000 Vista. The tractor that power-hungry hands couldn't leave alone. In its original form, the Minneapolis Meline G1000 Vista was already a commanding presence. 10,000 pounds of prairie muscle with a diesel heart built to outpull anything in its class. Its raised operator platform, the famous Vista, offered a commanding view of the field, and its long block engine delivered steady, disciplined torque. But discipline was never what drew people to the G1000. Power did, And for a certain kind of operator, power is never enough. Across the American Midwest, the G1000 became a canvas for mechanical appetite. Turbochargers larger than its designers imagined were bolted onto its manifold. Fuel racks were opened past factory tolerances. Injection timing was pushed into unsafe territory. Some swapped pistons and rods with components meant for industrial engines, forcing the block to endure shock loads it was never built to survive. At pulling tracks in Iowa and Missouri, these modified G10,000s roared like machines possessed. Long plumes of smoke, exhaust notes turning harsh as steel strained under each violent surge of combustion, frames flexed, crankshafts twisted, flywheels reached speeds where a single fracture line could transform into shrapnel. Operators stood close, not out of caution, but out of reverence for the monstrous creations they had coaxed out of an old prairie workhorse. What made the Vista dangerous was not a flaw in Minneapolis-Moline's engineering, but the unquenchable desire to push a willing machine past the edge of stability. In the hands of the obsessed, the G1000 became something else entirely. Magnificent, unpredictable, and never quite safe. Ranked 24th, Fiat 160-90 Monster Tune, when precision became a deadline. The Fiat 160-90 earned its reputation honestly. An Italian powerhouse whose six-cylinder engine delivered clean, disciplined strength across Mediterranean farmland. Its timing gears were cut with remarkable accuracy, its fuel system calibrated with a watchmaker's sense of order, and its turbocharger matched carefully to the block's metallurgy. In factory form, the machine lived within the narrow corridor of precision its designers intended. But in the hands of home tuners, that corridor quickly disappeared. As the tractor's popularity grew in Southern Europe, operators sought more. More torque for clay soil, more horsepower for heavy plows, more surge on steep terraced ground, and so boost screws were turned. Fuel settings widened. Turbochargers from lorries and industrial engines found their way onto manifolds never built for such pressure. Each adjustment nudged the 160-90 pass another invisible threshold, one that only precision had kept safe. Under excessive boost, exhaust temperatures soared. Pistons swelled faster than cooling systems could compensate. Head gaskets began to lose their resolve. On hard pulls, the engine's confident hum shifted into a sharper, brittle tone, an early warning that metallurgical limits were tightening around every cycle. And when those limits finally gave way, the failure was rarely gentle. A fractured piston crown, a split liner, an explosion of heat and force that emptied the field in seconds. The danger of the monster tune was never inherent to the Fiat itself. It emerged only when the exacting balance of Italian engineering was overwritten by raw ambition. In a tractor built on precision, even a few millimeters of boost were enough to turn mastery into risk. Ranked 23rd, Belarus MTZ82, the steering box that revealed its limits too late. For decades, the Belarus MTZ82 was celebrated as a champion of endurance, an iron workhorse built for harsh winters, uneven soil, and the long, unglamorous distances of Eastern European agriculture. Its simple mechanics, tall stance, and unmistakable exhaust note made it a symbol of reliability where reliability mattered most. Yet within the early production runs of this trusted machine lay a weakness that only revealed itself under pressure. The steering box, compact, economical, and designed for ease of service, functioned well on light implements and smooth terrain. But when front loaders were fitted or fields turned heavy with spring moisture, the internal gears met stresses they had never been engineered to withstand. Bearings wore prematurely, lash increased, and the steering wheel began to feel disconnected from the wheels it commanded. Operators described a moment of slow realization, a slight delay in response during tight maneuvers, a drifting arc on rough ground, a front axle that hesitated before committing to direction. And then, in the most severe cases, a sudden loss of control, one wheel turning more than the other, or not enough, or not at all. On slopes and narrow farm lanes, such moments did not merely inconvenience, they threatened overturn. The MTZ82 remained a respected tractor, but the revelation of its early steering weakness reshaped its legacy. Beneath the reputation for toughness lay a reminder that even the strongest machines can be undone by a single overlooked component. And that trust in a tractor is built not only on power, but on the certainty of its guidance. Ranked 22nd, Z-Tor Crystal Turbo Overboost Mods. When extra air turned a workhorse into an outlier, the Z-Tor Crystal earned its reputation through honesty, straightforward mechanics, thick castings, and an engine tuned for the slow, patient strength of Central European fields. In its standard form, nothing about the Crystal hinted at danger. It was a tractor built to endure, not excite. But when unofficial turbo kits began spreading across workshops in the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and the Balkans, the machine quietly stepped into unfamiliar territory. Overboost transformed the Crystal from a reliable draft partner into an anomaly. An engine breathing more air than its fuel system could meter, more pressure than its pistons could diffuse, more heat than its metallurgy could dissipate. Operators chasing quicker pulls or heavier loads twisted boost screws a few millimeters too far, unaware that those millimeters marked the threshold between controlled combustion and chaotic surge. The symptoms were subtle at first: a sharper whistle from the turbo, a harsher note in the exhaust, a momentary hesitation as the engine caught its breath. Then came the anomalies, unpredictable spikes in torque that jolted the driveline, sudden drops in power under sustained load, and, in the worst cases, violent detonation that hammered the block like a forge mallet. On hilly ground, these surges could unsettle the tractor's posture, shifting weight at angles the chassis was never meant to counter. Implements jerked, front axles lifted, steering wandered under strain. The modifications were small, but their consequences were irregular, inconsistent, mechanical behavior that no engineer had charted. What made the overboosted Z-Tor Crystal dangerous was not its origin, but its mutation. A dependable machine pulled outside its natural envelope becomes something unpredictable, and unpredictability is the one trait no tractor can safely wear. Ranked 21st, Fordson Major Propane Turbo Conversions, the flame that asked too much. The Fordson Major was never meant to breathe propane under pressure. In factory form, its broad-shouldered diesel engine pulled steadily through British soil, dependable as the seasons themselves. But in workshops far from the oversight of designers, a new idea took shape. Convert the engine to propane, strap on a turbocharger, and draw out a surge of power far beyond what diesel could offer. At first glance, the conversions worked. Propane ignited cleanly, delivering fast burn rates and sharp torque. With boost added, the engine felt suddenly alive, quicker to rise in revs, stronger under the plow. But the cost of this newfound strength emerged quickly, and harshly, propane's volatility left no buffer for miscalculations. A mixture slightly too lean sparked backfire. One too rich flooded the chamber with fuel that detonated. Instead of burning under turbo pressure, the danger sharpened. Combustion temperatures climbed to levels the cast iron head was never forged to endure. Valve seats overheated, piston crowns thinned, and every component became hostage to the precise balance between fuel, air, and heat. A single lapse, a sticky governor, a clogged regulator, a moment of overboost could trigger an explosion that turned the engine bay into a flash furnace. Farmers recounted the same pattern: a powerful pull, a sudden metallic knock, and then a burst of fire erupting from beneath the hood. What was gained in horsepower was taken back in risk, demanding constant vigilance and a willingness to stand beside a machine that no longer forgave mistakes. The propane turbo Fordson Major became a symbol of ambition pushed past safety, a reminder that in the pursuit of more power, something vital is often sacrificed first. Ranked 20th, Ford 8N with no ROPS. The little legend that flipped too fast. By the late 1940s, the Ford 8N had become the most familiar shape on American farms, small, affordable, and painted in the iconic red and gray. It looked harmless, but inside that compact frame hid a geometry that punished even the smallest mistake. The 8N's short wheelbase and light rear end made it dangerously eager to lift when pulling from the wrong point. Hitch low to the drawbar, it behaved exactly as engineers intended. But hitched too high, wrapped around the axle housing, a homemade hook, or a chain thrown on in a hurry, the tractor turned into a lever waiting to snap. And when it snapped, it did so instantly. Across North America, farmers described the same moment. Clutch engaged, load resisted, nose rising in a violent arc. Within 2 seconds, the 8N could flip completely over backward. No cab, no seat belt, no ROPS, no second chance. Rear overturns became one of the deadliest accidents in mid-century farming, and the 8N appeared in far too many of the reports. At first, the blame went to operator error, but as researchers studied rollover patterns, the truth emerged. Older tractors like the 8N were simply unforgiving. A few inches of hitch height could decide everything. Decades later, entire safety programs were created just to retrofit ROPS onto these machines. Modern tractors now come with rollover protection by law, lessons written in steel, soil, and tragedies from another era. Today, the Ford 8N is beloved by collectors and restored all across YouTube. But behind the nostalgia remains its warning. Even a small tractor can rear up faster than a human can react. The danger wasn't horsepower. It was leverage, and the moment when physics stopped listening. Ranked 19th. International Harvester 560. The axle that paid for a hidden decision. When International Harvester introduced the 560 in 1958, it arrived as the company's bold attempt to reclaim dominance in the horsepower race. Its new 6-cylinder engine delivered a level of thrust the market had been waiting for. Smooth, confident, and ready for implements heavier than anything the 1950s had offered. But beneath that promising surge lay a decision made years earlier, long before the 560 was conceived. To save time and tooling costs, IH reused the rear axle housing originally designed for smaller, less powerful tractors. On paper, the structure appeared adequate. In the controlled quiet of engineering rooms, tolerances aligned, stress diagrams matched, and no alarms were raised. But the fields of America do not operate on paper. Under the load of modern plows and deep working cultivators, the reinforced but aging design began to reveal its limits. Farmers in Iowa and Illinois were the first to speak up. A vibration under heavy drawbar pull, a sharp clunk when the tractor shifted weight on uneven soil. Then reports turned into failures, axle shafts shearing, housings cracking near the bearing seats, wheels pulling inward under stress until the entire rear assembly collapsed. Some incidents occurred on open fields, others on gravel roads. Each one a stark reminder that engineering shortcuts carry long shadows. The 560 recall became one of the most significant in tractor history, reshaping trust in a brand that had defined rural America. Its danger did not come from reckless power or wild modification, but from the consequence of underestimating the strength required for a new generation of machines. A single structural choice, made quietly, economically, became the fault line on which the tractor's destiny turned. Ranked 18th. Intercontinental DT415 Experimental. A prototype built faster than its future. The Intercontinental DT415 never reached mass production, and perhaps for good reason. Conceived during an era of rapid mechanization, it emerged as a bold prototype meant to bridge the gap between industrial power units and large-frame agricultural tractors. Engineers envisioned a machine that could deliver the endurance of a stationary diesel with the mobility of a field workhorse, an ambitious fusion at a time when materials, cooling systems, and driveline designs were still catching up to such demands. At the center of the DT415 experiment was a heavy industrial diesel engine repurposed for traction duty. The block produced impressive torque, but its cooling layout, efficient for stationary work, struggled when exposed to constant vibration, dust, and variable load. Heat pooled in pockets the design never accounted for. Stress lines formed around mounting points not originally meant to handle field shock. Even the transmission, a custom-built hybrid, fought against the uneven pulses of an engine never intended for constant motion. Field tests revealed the truth. On flat ground, the DT415 behaved like a stubborn but willing prototype. But under real agricultural load, a plow biting into dense soil, a cultivator shuddering across clay, the tractor's internal systems fell out of sync. temperatures spiked, gears protested, power delivery surged unpredictably, creating moments where the machine lunged forward or hesitated at exactly the wrong time. Test drivers reported a sense of instability, as if the tractor were constantly trying to reconcile two engineering philosophies. The Dita 415 was not abandoned because it failed. It was abandoned because its origin made failure inevitable. It was an early attempt to merge two worlds that were not yet ready to coexist. And in its brief life, it demonstrated a truth as old as engineering itself. A machine's birth often determines its fate long before it touches the field. Ranked 17th, White 4-270, the frame that carried more fear than steel. The White 4-270 arrived in the early 1980s as a symbol of raw American horsepower, an articulated four-wheel drive tractor built to drag massive implements across the broadest plains. Its appearance radiated confidence, towering tires, a long central hinge, and a high-output engine that delivered the steady thunder of industrial strength. But deep within its chassis, just ahead of the articulation joint, an unease quietly formed, the kind of unease that spreads from field to field through stories told at parts counters and grain elevators. The frame, though muscular in appearance, bore a hidden vulnerability. Welds near the articulation housing carried more stress than predictions in the design room had suggested. Under hard draft loads, the metal flexed with a rhythm that felt harmless at first, just a shiver through the seat, a tremor along the cab floor. But repeated seasons of deep ripping and heavy pulling turned those tremors into fatigue lines. Farmers described a moment of recognition, noticing the articulation hinge no longer perfectly aligned, hearing a faint metallic tick on tight turns, feeling the tractor lean ever so slightly off axis. And then came the fractures, hairline cracks that grew with each hour of strain. In the worst cases, the structural split advanced enough to compromise steering control, leaving the operator with a machine that could pivot unpredictably under weight. The danger of the 427-0 was not dramatic, not explosive. It was cumulative, a tractor strong enough to dominate the field, yet harboring a frame that slowly resisted its own mission. Every hour of heavy work deepened the tension between the power it delivered and the steel that struggled to contain it. In the end, the 427 earned its unsettling nickname, not from spectacle, but from a truth every farmer understood. When the backbone of a giant begins to crack, there is no warning sharp enough to come before the break. Ranked 16th, Belarus 1523. When ballast turned a workhorse into an unpredictable giant, the Belarus 1523 was engineered to be a durable mid-range powerhouse, straightforward hydraulics, a stout frame, and an engine tuned for long days in deep soil. In factory form, it behaved exactly as its designers intended, a dependable puller with a reputation for brute survival rather than elegance. But in regions where traction meant profit, wet fields, clay ridges, heavy subsoilers, operators began adding ballast far beyond the specifications stamped into the manual. Those weights transformed the 1523 into an anomaly. Extra front slabs to keep the nose down, massive wheel weights to fight slip, home-welded boxes filled with sand, stone, or scrap iron. Each addition shifted the tractor's center of gravity downward and forward, tightening the load on the front axle until it worked at the edge of its geometry. Steering, once steady, grew resistant. The tires clawed the soil instead of gripping it. Under sudden deceleration, the tractor's mass lunged with a momentum disproportionate to its size. And then came the unpredictable moments, operators cresting a small rise only to feel the front end dive, or braking on slopes where the weighted nose pulled the tractor into a sharper angle than expected. Some machines buckled their axle supports, others snapped steering linkages that were never designed to counter such leverage. On uneven terrain, the overballasted 1523 could tilt into a quick, unnatural pitch, behaving not like a tractor, but like a weighted pendulum thrown off balance. Its danger was not designed nor accidental. It was emergent, born from a modification that twisted the machine's physics until the familiar became strange and the reliable became risky. The 1523 remained the same tractor at its core, but the weights turned it into something else entirely, a giant that behaved by rules no engineer had written. Ranked 15th, Volvo BM810. The turbo experiment that pushed beyond Swedish tolerances, the Volvo BM810 was built with the careful logic that defined Sweden's industrial age. Broad axles for stability, a heavy cast chassis for endurance, and an engine calibrated for the steady, methodical labor of Scandinavian farms. Its heart, a naturally aspirated diesel, delivered torque with the quiet certainty of a machine designed to last decades, not seasons. In factory form, nothing about the 810 suggested danger. But when the first wave of turbo experiments swept across Europe in the 1980s, the BM810 became an unlikely participant. Owners, seeking faster work on steep forest tracks and peat fields, fitted aftermarket turbos to extract more power from the tractor's stoic engine. What they gained in output, they lost in precision. The 810's internals, pistons machined to close tolerances, rods balanced to exacting weight, relied on a predictable combustion cycle. Turbocharging disrupted that balance. Cylinder pressures rose sharply, hammering bearings that had once lived comfortable mechanical lives. Exhaust temperatures climbed, straining the metallurgy of valves and seats. And when the fuel pump was turned up to match the newfound air supply, the engine's previously gentle rhythm hardened into something more violent. Operators began noticing the signs. A sharper clatter at high load, a sudden shiver through the frame when the tractor crested a hill, the metallic knock that announced impending failure. Some engines cracked their liners, others split their head gaskets. A few suffered catastrophic rod failures that sent steel crashing through the block. The danger of the turbocharged BM810 was not showy, not reckless. It was precise. A machine engineered to operate within a narrow mechanical envelope was pushed beyond it, and the margin for error vanished. When the tolerances failed, they did so with the unforgiving clarity that only precision can produce. Ranked 14th, Allis-Chalmers D17 LP gas. The tractor that spoke in fire. The Allis-Chalmers D17 was a symbol of mid-century American confidence, broad-shouldered, dependable, and available in configurations that matched the changing energy landscape. Among them, the LP gas version promised cleaner combustion, easier cold starts, and a fuel source gaining popularity across the rural Midwest. For many operators, it seemed the smarter, more modern choice. But LP gas is a fuel without forgiveness, and the D17's combustion chamber revealed that truth with unsettling clarity. Unlike diesel, LP gas ignites instantly and violently, requiring perfect mixture, perfect timing, and perfect valve behavior. Any deviation, however slight, created a pocket of fuel that lingered a moment too long, waiting for the next spark or glowing ember of carbon. When it ignited, the result was not a simple misfire, but an eruption. A concussive backflash that thundered through the intake, shook the hood, and sent a pillar of flame snapping outward with the force of compressed air released too suddenly. Farmers recalled how the D17LP behaved at its limits. A cough that felt wrong, a metallic thump beneath the tank, a loud report that cracked across the field like a shotgun blast. Carburetors blew their gaskets. Air cleaners blackened from soot. Some hoods warped from the flash heat of repeated explosions. And on rare but unforgettable occasions, the flame shot forward with enough violence to force operators off the platform. The revelation was harsh but undeniable. LP gas demanded a level of mechanical harmony that field conditions rarely allowed. In a tractor built for rugged work, the fuel introduced a temperament more suited to controlled environments. The D17 LP gas model remained capable and beloved by many, but its backfire taught a lesson etched in fire. Even a trusted machine can hold a hidden temperament, revealed only when the chemistry of combustion turns against it. Ranked 13th, Soviet KATZ T150K, the overload that broke its direction. Across the vast wheat plains of the Soviet Union, the KATZ T150K became a familiar silhouette. Its angular cab, wide stance, and clamorous diesel engine forming part of the landscape itself, built for endurance, not refinement, It served on collective farms where a tractor's value was measured in hectares, turned rather than hours recorded. It was strong, simple, and, at least in controlled conditions, steadfast. But as machinery grew heavier and expectations grew larger, the T150K was pushed toward workloads that quietly eclipsed the limits of its hydraulically assisted steering system. The tractor could pull more than its designers intended, until the steering linkage faced forces that left no room for mechanical forgiveness. Under extreme drawbar loads, the articulation joint received asymmetric stress. Front wheels locked momentarily under heavy soil, while the rear half continued to push. Transferring twisting force into the steering cylinders, bearings wore out of round. Link arms flexed in ways the metallurgy was never meant to accommodate. Operators reported a subtle warning long before the danger appeared. Steering that felt hesitant, unresponsive, or delayed by a heartbeat. Then, under a full load on uneven ground, hesitation became consequence. The T150K could drift off its intended line, forcing the operator to wrestle for control. In severe cases, a cylinder seal would rupture without warning, leaving one wheel obedient and the other left to trace its own path. On slopes, that split second of asymmetry could pivot the tractor sharply, enough to jerk an implement sideways or tip the machine into a sudden angle no operator expected. The T150K's flaw was not a dramatic mechanical failure, but a quiet one. A reminder that when a tractor built for strength is burdened with more than its steering can command, the danger does not announce itself with noise, only with direction lost at the worst possible moment. Ranked 12th, John Deere 8020 V1. The giant whose failures helped shape the future. When John Deere unveiled the 8020 in 1960, the world of agriculture changed shape. No farm machine had ever looked quite like it. An immense articulated four-wheel drive tractor designed not as an upgrade, but as a declaration that the age of small two-wheel drive workhorses was ending. With duals at every corner, a towering frame, and a diesel heart borrowed from industrial equipment, the 8020 was the first production tractor to bring true four-wheel power to American fields. But the earliest V1 units carried vulnerabilities that revealed themselves long before the machine earned its legendary status. The driveline, tasked with transmitting unprecedented torque through the articulation joint, struggled under sustained heavy work. Universal joints wore prematurely, lubrication channels clogged with field dust drawn through imperfect seals. The massive Detroit diesel engine produced harmonics the early transmission housing was not built to absorb. Operators reported a distinctive shudder when shifting under load, the kind that suggested metal learning to resist forces just beyond its design envelope. Then came the overheating, subtle at first but dangerous. The cooling system, sized on theory more than field reality, labored to keep temperatures stable during deep ripping or plowing in hot Midwestern summers. In some V1 units, the heat crept upward until bearings softened, seals contracted, and power lost its smooth confidence. Yet the 8020 did not vanish into obscurity. Instead, Deere issued recalls, reinforced housings, improved sealing, and refined the cooling architecture. From these early missteps grew the blueprint for every high-horsepower articulated tractor that followed. What the 8020 V1 failed to endure became the knowledge its successors would never forget. Its legacy was forged not from perfection, but from the lessons written into the flaws of a machine that attempted to arrive before its time. A giant whose early weaknesses helped build the giants that would come after. Ranked 11th, Cockshut Black Hawk, home-built Phipps 8, the tractor that forgot it was a tractor. On quiet Canadian farms, the Cockshut platform was known for modest dependability, clean lines, honest torque, and the restrained engineering of mid-century agriculture. But in barns and machine sheds where winter offered long hours and curious minds, one particular Cockshut was rebuilt into something unrecognizable. An anomaly stitched together from ambition and raw horsepower. Enthusiasts called it the Blackhawk. A home-built V8 conversion that replaced the original workmanlike four-cylinder with the thundering heart of an automotive engine. The transplant was crude in places, ingenious in others. Frame rails were widened and reinforced by feel rather than calculation. Motor mounts were cut and welded until the angles looked right. And when the V8 first fired, its exhaust transformed the quiet farmyard into a space suddenly too small for the sound it produced. Power surged through components never designed to contain it. The clutch engaged with a violence that snapped driveline lash into sharp metallic reports. The rear axle, once content with the steady pull of a factory engine, endured torque spikes that twisted its shafts and threatened its seals. Steering became a negotiation rather than a command. The front wheels lightened under acceleration, drifting toward the unpredictable. And at speed, the tractor behaved with a strange dual identity, half field machine, half unruly hot rod. Farmers who witnessed it described a contradiction, a machine simultaneously impressive and unsettling, capable of wheel-raising launches one moment and sudden, jarring stalls the next. Nothing responded with consistency. Every action carried the potential for something unexpected. The Black Hawk was never mass-produced, never standardized, never safe in any formal sense. It existed on the edge of invention, proof that when a tractor forgets its purpose and adopts the heartbeat of a car, it becomes something far more thrilling and far more dangerous than either was meant to be. Ranked 10th, Case IH 9150. When turbo ambition took more than the tractor could give. The Case IH 9150 was born into the North American plains as a symbol of discipline. Its Cummins diesel, tuned for durability. Its articulated frame built to pull deep rippers across miles of black soil without complaint. From factory lines, it delivered exactly what its engineers intended. Steady power, cool temperatures, and the kind of mechanical honesty that made it a cornerstone of large-acre farming. But among operators who measured performance not by endurance but by conquest, the 9150 became something else. Shops across the Midwest began installing aftermarket turbo kits, larger compressors, higher flow injectors, and fuel settings that strained the very geometry of combustion. The promise was seductive, more horsepower per dollar than any new tractor on the market. The cost came later. Higher boost meant cylinder pressures climbing past the block's long-tested limits. Pistons that once glided through predictable heat cycles now faced temperatures that distorted their crowns. The head gasket, a precise seal between metal plates in a carefully balanced system, became the first casualty, pushed to rupture by forces it was never asked to endure. And when it failed, the engine didn't sputter, it detonated. Coolant flashed into steam, oil sprayed into chambers, and the tractor that once pulled with confidence became a furnace of cascading mechanical collapse. Operators described the warning signs: a sharper turbo whistle, a hollow metallic note under load, the brief cough before the engine surrendered to the imbalance. Some failures were contained. Others tore through housings with explosive violence, ejecting fragments that left scars in barns and fields. The 9150 never intended to be dangerous. It became so only when its margin of safety was sacrificed for power. It was never promised. A tractor engineered for endurance was asked to sprint, and the distance between those two missions proved costly. Ranked 9th, Fiat 180-90 King of Mods, the cult tractor that power could never satisfy. Across Europe's Mediterranean farmlands, the Fiat 180-90 earned a reputation that bordered on myth. Its six-cylinder engine, broad-shouldered, deep-voiced, and deceptively smooth, became the soundtrack of contractors and custom operators who worked the hardest ground. In factory form, it was already a formidable machine. But for many owners, formidable was merely the beginning. Few tractors attracted modifiers the way the 180-90 did. In workshops from Sicily to Spain, boost screws were turned until gauges leaned far past reason. Larger turbos, borrowed from trucks and heavy industrial engines, were grafted onto manifolds meant for gentler airflow. Intercoolers were improvised. Fuel settings widened. Injection pumps were adjusted with the quiet intensity of craftsmen chasing something just out of reach. Each modification brought more power, and each new surge fed an appetite that grew with every pass across the field. But obsession carries a price. The 180-90's rugged block hit limits that could be stretched only so far. Excessive boost pushed exhaust temperatures to the edge of metallurgical tolerance. Pistons expanded faster than cooling systems could compensate. Head gaskets strained beneath the violence of overcompression. Under extreme loads, torque spikes traveled through the driveline with enough force to twist shafts and hammer bearings out of alignment. And when the engine finally protested, it did so with drama, a sudden cough at full pull, followed by a plume of smoke, or worse, a sound like a hammer breaking stone, announcing that a rod or piston had surrendered. Operators recount the same mix of pride and dread, knowing they had awakened a giant, and knowing that giants fall loudly. The Fiat 180-90 did not become dangerous by design. It became dangerous through devotion, through the hands of those who refused to accept limits, who coaxed a dependable workhorse into becoming the king of mods, and in doing so turned power into precarious art. Ranked 8th, Big Bud HN250, the giant that leaned against its own power. Before the Big Bud 747 became legend, its lineage began with tractors like the HN250. Early giants built in Montana's welding shops during a period when horsepower seemed to grow as quickly as the wheat it cultivated. The HN250 carried a massive frame, industrial axles, and a power plant that delivered torque with the steady certainty of a locomotive. On paper, it was a triumph of scale. But in its earliest configurations, scale alone proved to be a double-edged truth. The weight distribution of the first HN250s placed enormous mass toward the rear, creating a posture that looked commanding but behaved unpredictably. On level ground, the imbalance was subtle, a faint lightness in the steering, a sense that the front tires skimmed rather than gripped. But under real agricultural load, the consequences became more pronounced. When the tractor pulled deep into heavy soil, the rear end dug in with an authority the front could not match. Steering response dulled, turning arcs widened beyond operator intention, and on clay ridges or loose hillsides, the lightened nose wandered just enough to transform a simple correction into a struggle for control. Farmers described the same unnerving moment, the tractor beginning to pivot under torque, while the front end hesitated, suspended between traction and float implements designed for lesser machines only amplified the issue. Air drills and plows created draft forces that exaggerated the imbalance. In extreme situations, the nose rose inches higher than safe tolerances, harmless in appearance, but enough to compromise steering authority. A machine meant to dominate the field had, in its earliest form, to negotiate constantly with its own center of gravity. The HN250 did not remain this way. Later revisions redistributed weight, strengthened the front, and brought the balance that Big Bud machines are now known for. But its early years left a lesson etched across the plains. In the world of oversized tractors, power without equilibrium is not strength. It is a consequence waiting for the wrong terrain. Rank 7th, Allis-Chalmers D21, pulling mods, when horsepower became a wager with fire. The Allis-Chalmers D21 was born a workhorse, broad-shouldered, square-framed, and known for the deep, confident rumble of its diesel engine. In its original form, it tilled Midwestern soil with a calm, steady patience. But in the world of competitive tractor pulling, patience holds no value, power does. And so the D21 became one of the most transformed machines in rural motorsport, rebuilt into something capable of 2,000, even 3,000 horsepower. What emerged from these workshops was not a tractor in the traditional sense, but a purpose-built storm. Boost pressures climbed to levels no agricultural designer ever anticipated. Turbochargers, the size of milk pails, inhaled air with an urgency that bent the shape of sound itself. Fuel flowed like liquid dynamite through injection pumps tuned to fractions of a millimeter. Inside the block, pistons endured combustion temperatures that bordered on the metallurgical breaking point, their crowns glowing faintly with the heat of relentless compression, and the price of this transformation was inevitable. Blocks split under the strain of detonation. Connecting rods, once content to move with rhythmic certainty, snapped into violent shrapnel flywheels, spinning far beyond their agricultural limits, occasionally shattered with explosive force, sending fragments tearing through the dirt like bronze fragments from an ancient cannon. Even the chassis protested, twisting against torque loads that threatened its very posture. Pullers knew the risk. They tightened bolts by feel, listened for tones only experience could interpret, and braced for the possibility that each run might be the last for the engine beneath them. Because to summon thousands of horsepower from a tractor designed for hundreds is to strike a bargain with physics, and physics never forgets what it is owed. The D21 in pulling form became a monument to sacrifice, a machine willing to trade longevity for spectacle, reliability for glory, and safety margins for a few unforgettable seconds where power eclipses everything else. Ranked 6th, Big Bud Aircraft Tire Prototype, a giant standing on the wrong kind of wings. Long before the Big Bud name became synonymous with monumental prairie power, a quieter experiment unfolded in the wide spaces of Montana. A massive prototype fitted not with traditional agricultural rubber, but with surplus aircraft tires, smooth, rigid, and engineered for runways rather than furrows. On paper, the idea seemed bold but plausible. Aircraft tires were strong, plentiful, incapable of carrying immense weight. But what lifted airplanes into the sky proved far less predictable when asked to grip soil. The moment the prototype rolled into the field, it behaved like a creature unsure of its footing. The stiff aircraft casings, built to absorb the momentum of landing jets, refused to flex around stones, ridges, or ruts. Instead of contouring to the earth, they skimmed over it, reducing the tractor's footprint to an unforgiving contact patch. Traction became a negotiation, steering a suggestion, and on uneven ground, the tractor rocked with a slow, unsettling sway, as if the tires were balancing atop the land rather than gripping it. Under heavy pull, draft forces pushed the rigid tires into patterns no agricultural engineer had charted. The front end wandered. Rear axles felt light despite the machine's enormous mass. Operators described the same unnerving scenario, the tractor turning slightly more or less than commanded, depending on which tire struck a ridge first. On slopes, the lack of lateral bite created moments where the machine slid sideways with the grace of an aircraft drifting across tarmac. An elegant motion in the air, but a dangerous one on soil. Field tests ended quietly. No dramatic failures, no explosions of steel, only the realization that physics had drawn a line. The experiment could not cross. A tractor, no matter how powerful, cannot stand securely on tires designed to meet runways instead of earth. The Big Bud Aircraft Tire Prototype remains a mechanical curiosity, a reminder that even giants become anomalies when they stand on the wrong kind of wings. Ranked 5th, Steiger Wildcat Twin Engine, when two hearts refuse to beat as one. Before Steiger became a household name in the world of high-horsepower tractors, the company's spirit of experimentation produced a handful of prototypes that blurred the line between practicality and ambition. Among them stood a Wildcat unlike any other, its broad green frame housing not one diesel engine, but two, mounted in tandem and linked through a shared driveline. On paper, the idea carried logic, double the power for the vast, untamed prairie fields of the northern plains. But in practice, the Wildcat revealed a truth that no drawing board could predict. Even when tuned with care, each power unit developed its own cadence. Tiny variations in combustion timing, fuel delivery, and rotational pulse under idle. The tractor hummed with impressive symmetry. But as the machine entered real work, deep ripping, heavy plowing, or climbing packed clay, the illusion frayed. One engine surged a fraction sooner. The other lagged a heartbeat behind. Those micro differences collided in the driveline, creating torque pulses that struck like uneven hammer blows against shafts, bearings, and gears. Operators described sensations no single-engine tractor had ever produced: a subtle twist through the frame, a vibration that grew teeth under load, a shudder that rippled forward from the articulation joint. Steering became unpredictable as the mismatched torque tugged unevenly at the axles. On slopes, the tractor's enormous mass amplified these misalignments, creating brief but terrifying moments when control felt borrowed rather than owned. The revelation came quietly but decisively. Engines designed to lead cannot share the crown. The Wildcat's twin heart experiment demanded a harmony that mechanical systems could not sustain, not with the precision required for fieldwork measured in inches and seconds. The project faded, but its lesson endured. Power is not merely quantity, it is unity, rhythm, and control. And the day the twin-engine Wildcat lost that unity, it revealed a truth as immutable as the soil it struggled to command. Ranked fourth, Soviet Kirovets K701, Arctic Nitrospec. A coal-born giant running on the edge of chemistry, the Kirovets K701 was never meant to be subtle. It strode across Soviet farmland like a piece of moving architecture. Towering wheels, a square-jawed cab, and an engine bay that housed industrial horsepower, clothed in agricultural duty. But the Arctic Nitrospec version took that brutality into a realm few tractors had ever entered. Operating reliably at temperatures that could freeze diesel into stone. To wake a machine in such conditions required more than engineering. It required chemistry. Standard diesel thickened in Siberian cold. So engineers and field crews turned to volatile blends, ether, nitro-boosted cold start agents, and rapid evaporation fuels that turned ignition into a controlled explosion against iron chilled almost to brittleness. The result was an engine that did not simply start, it detonated into motion. Steel contracted from the cold, met shock waves it was never meant to absorb. Crankcases trembled. Manifolds rang like struck metal plates. And sometimes the sudden burst of combustion outran the lubrication that lagged behind in oil channels still stiffened by the night. Under these conditions, the K701 behaved like an anomaly, part tractor, part improvised survival machine. As the massive V12 diesel warmed, chemical residues from the cold start agents vaporized unpredictably, creating erratic throttle response. Some engines surged without command. Others hesitated as fuel atomized inconsistently in the frigid air. On treacherous permafrost, where traction depended on delicate balance, even a momentary surge could twist the articulation joint or break the grip of all four driven wheels. Operators learned to fear those opening minutes, the period when machinery and chemistry negotiated whether the day would begin with power or with danger. The Arctic Nitrospec K701 endures in memory not for its achievements, but for the strange, volatile rituals required just to bring it to life. A tractor forced to operate where fuel, metal, and physics behave like strangers. An anomaly born of cold, power, and necessity. Ranked third, Case Cross Motor, 12 to 20. The tractor that turned before the operator did. When the Case Cross Motor 12 to 20 appeared in the mid-1920s, it stood apart from anything else on American soil. Its sideways engine, set crosswise across the frame, gave the tractor a low prow and a broad mechanical stance. The design was innovative, bold, and unmistakably modern for its time. But beneath this confidence lived a flaw that pressed itself into the memories of early operators, a steering system that carried more strain than its steel could endure. The Wurman sector gear at the heart of the 12 to 20s steering was forged for fields of moderate load, not for the stones, ruts, and sudden jolts of early mechanized agriculture. As the tractor aged, tiny cracks formed along the gear teeth, hairline fractures that crept further each season. At first they created play in the wheel, then hesitation, then a lag that forced operators to anticipate turns seconds before they needed them. What seemed like harmless looseness soon became something darker. Farmers recounted moments when the 12 to 20 suddenly veered as torque pulsed through a failing gear. On uneven terrain, the front axle obeyed the fracture instead of the driver. A slight correction turned into a sharp pivot. A harmless ridge became a tipping point, and on the narrow berms that bordered irrigation ditches, a steering failure meant the tractor slipped sideways with no warning at all, steel wheels clawing at soil that could not hold the mass. There was no explosion, no dramatic collapse, only tension, a silent negotiation between weakening metal and the human who guided it. A tractor designed to lead the transition into modern fieldwork instead became a reminder that even innovation carries blind spots, and that the smallest mechanical crack can widen into danger faster than a pair of hands can steer against. Ranked second, Oliver 99 Gasoline, the engine that struck back. In the late 1930s, the Oliver 99 stood as one of the great early high-power tractors, massive, long-hooded, and driven by a gasoline engine that delivered torque far beyond what smaller farms had ever seen. Its reputation rested on sheer pulling strength. But hidden within that strength was a starting ritual so dangerous it carved its own chapter into rural memory. The 99 carried no electric starter in its early form. To awaken it, the operator gripped a cold steel hand crank mounted at the engine's nose, bracing body and breath against a machine that answered not with cooperation, but with risk. The high-compression gasoline chambers, when mistimed or overfueled, could ignite at the wrong instant, firing backward instead of forward. This kickback, a reverse explosion of force, snapped the crank in the opposite direction with the violence of a sprung trap. Dozens of farmers across the Midwest recalled the same sequence: a firm pull, a sudden metallic cough, and then a brutal strike, a crank handle whipping backward with bone-breaking speed. Wrists shattered, forearms fractured. In the most severe cases, the force threw operators off their feet as the 99 lunged against its own ignition rhythm. The tractor's power was unquestionable, but so was its temper. Even after Oliver introduced safety instructions, open the valves, enrich the mixture carefully, never wrap a thumb around the handle, the risks remained. The 99 demanded respect not just for its horsepower, but for the price of mishandling its breath of life. For modern eyes, the lack of shielding, the exposed gearing, and the hand crank ritual seem almost primitive. Yet this was the reality of early high-power gasoline tractors, machines that offered strength in the field, but asked for sacrifice at the moment of awakening. The Oliver 99 earned its place near the top of this list, not because it failed, but because it made clear that danger can live in the very act of bringing a giant to life. In first place, Allis-Chalmers WD with home-built front-end loader, the machine that left only silence behind. Across countless North American farms, the Allis-Chalmers WD still sits in the corners of barns. Its orange paint faded, its steel worn smooth by decades of work. Most appear harmless now, idle relics of a simpler mechanical age. But among them are machines that bear quieter marks: bent loader arms, warped front bolsters, a crease in the frame where weight once shifted too quickly. These are the homemade loader conversions, fabricated in weld shops, assembled in driveways, pushed beyond the geometry their designers ever intended. And it is here, in these altered front ends, that silence gathers. The WD's narrow frame was never built for the leverage of a high front load. With a homemade loader mounted too far forward, its center of gravity crept into dangerous territory. Lifting soil one moment, balancing on the edge of physics the next under strain, the front axle bowed. Steering grew heavy, and on uneven ground, all it took was a fraction of a second. The bucket rising too fast, the frame diving too far, the world tilting before hands could react. When these machines went over, they did not warn. They pivoted forward with the suddenness of a falling beam, silently, completely, leaving no room for correction. There are no dramatic reports, no manuals documenting these incidents. Only the absence: a tractor righted slowly by neighbors, the groove in the soil where the loader struck, the empty space in the barn where a seat once had an owner. Stories passed quietly at fence rows and grain elevators speak of the same moment: the WD lifting into the air without command, rolling itself forward as if pulled by gravity alone. The danger lives not in a single flaw, but in the stillness that follows. A design stretched too far, a well line placed inches off the safe angle, a load shifted at the wrong heartbeat of terrain. Today, those WDs remain, not as villains, but as reminders. Machines that taught future generations why rollover protection became law, why loaders require engineered mounts, why balance is not a suggestion, but a boundary. And so the number one place on this list is given not to power, or noise, or spectacle, but to a quiet machine whose most dangerous moment left behind only silence. Some of these tractors changed farming, some nearly ended it, and others still sit in barns and fence lines, carrying the quiet memory of the people who trusted them. If this journey showed you something you didn't expect, a design flaw, a forgotten danger, or a machine that should never have been allowed to run? Tell me which story stayed with you the longest. Because history doesn't disappear. It waits in steel, in weld lines, in old machines that still whisper their warnings to anyone willing to look closely enough. Which tractor, in your opinion, should truly be illegal?